So this is a story about how much I love Zelda. I actually grew up and I was very bad at Zelda. I think I was, my kid is better at the new complicated Zelda than I was at the young, in retrospect, easy Zelda. So this is actually a talk of Zelda pro tips. So prepare yourself for just, did you know that you can, in the new Zelda Breath of the Wild, if you use stasis on a tree and climb it and then use the sledgehammer to spin and hit and then shoot an arrow in it, you can climb up in the tree before stasis wears off and ride the tree into like 1,000 feet in the air and then glide across the entire map. It's dope as hell. Anyway, no more? Okay. My name is Brandon. I'm the head of engineering at Ojo Labs, which is a really cool little AI startup. It's a platform for real estate agents. I work with Chris Freeman. It's very fun to work with people like Chris. We have a cool little application. Ojo's sponsoring tonight because we actually want somebody to come do cool Ember and Elixir stuff with us. So if that sounds interesting to you and working with people like Chris Freeman sounds interesting to you, you should definitely be interested in that. It doesn't mean anything. It's not for anything. I just saw this. It kind of made the rounds on the internet, but I just had to bring this up. I can't get it out of my head. There was the developer for this game called Fighting Baseball for the Super NES. Came up with was a Japanese person whose job was to come up with 20 American-sounding names. And so at first glance, they do look legit. And then you just read them. And I'm trying to decide if I like Mario McRowain or Bobson Dugnut better. And actually, I want somebody to write a generator for these, because these are amazing. This seems like you could Markov chain your way to some really fun video game names. Okay, trigger warning. There's GIFs. There's so many. So I stopped actually working in Ember full-time a little over a year ago. And then through no fault of my own, I started again. There are folks that are going to tell you that like Ember has died, and that's a really fun topic that I'm not going to get into. But I think my experience being away for a year, if Ember had died, I probably would have recognized it when I came back to do it again. But I had to like reread the docs and relearn how Ember works now. So it apparently has been under active development the year that I was gone. They did not pause for my absence, which I think was rude. I want to tell some stories that highlight two kinds of alignment that can guide your decisions and potentially save you a bunch of pain and heartache and frustration. So these concepts of tactical alignment and philosophical alignment. The first type is tactical alignment or tactical fit. That's when your tools and your environment are set up for short-term success at least. So the tools that you use match a set of problems that's sitting right in front of you. An example of this would be using a tool that's really good at talking to a database for building simple CRUD apps. The second is philosophical alignment. When your tools and your environment are all philosophically aligned, you're going to be set up to further your purpose and your long-term goals. A couple examples of this would be using tooling that helps you do test-driven development easier, or processes that make documentation easier, if those are things that you care about. And when your environment or your tools don't match one of those, if it's not tactically aligned or it's not philosophically aligned with you, you're not set up to be helped by the things in your environment. And so that means you're swimming upstream. And you're going to be confronted, if you haven't already, with situations like that where you realize that you're swimming upstream and you have to figure out what to do other than just feel pain. Maybe your core philosophy isn't shared by the rest of your team. Or for some reason, your team isn't able to make your tools accomplish your tactical goals. Most of us are conditioned to fight on and push through, and often that is the right thing. Or you can pivot, holding on to the philosophical components of your work, but changing your tactics. Or you can bail altogether and find new tools or a new environment that sets you up for better success. So I'm going to tell 3 stories to illustrate these. The first story is DHH, the creator of Rails, and we're going to break it into 3 acts. So DHH, our intrepid hero, ventures into the wilderness of 2004 to do battle with database-backed web applications. Tactically, what he wants to do is ship Basecamp, first and foremost. He doesn't hurt from getting extra publicity, and he wants to use open source to share his ideas and build a community around these ideas and around this solution. Philosophically, he stands his ground that solving the 80% use case and building a solution that makes programmers happy are the cornerstones of this tooling. So he bases his solution on Ruby. And then he starts waving the convention over configuration flag around, because devs would apparently rather spend 2 hours realizing they mistyped the name of a controller, I guess, than configuring something. And he founds the Church of the 80% use case. So even though it's largely considered a cult, it's been granted tax-exempt status. And he's the hero that we need to take down J2EE dominance and create a place for independent open source. But as soon as Rails starts getting any kind of meaningful attention, forces combine to try and stop its spread. By the way, I've got a few of these. Oh, they're so good. Zelda will kill you in the most fascinating ways. You could just stand there and a boulder will fall on you. So DHH is forced to realize he's swimming upstream because of the norms and standards in the tech ecosystem back in 2004. And crowds gathered to jeer at this amateur trying to turn Ruby into a scalable platform for web applications. And even now, it can be a struggle to convince people that Ruby still has a lot to offer. Shut up! But spoiler alert, DHH stuck that out. And he has a lot of reasons to stick with his plan, but mainly that it's working. He's still embracing the same principles and philosophies and building the same tool set as he was 10 years ago. And he seems to have done like race car grade good for himself. So the Church of the 80% use case still stands today. All right, second story. Yehuda Katz has a similar story with a different ending. He sets out, I presume, to build software and improve the ecosystems that he works in. My guesses about his tactical goals as he set out involved improving ecosystems, but always shipping code and building products along the way. Philosophically, Yehuda has been pretty outspoken about building the web as a platform and using communities to build shared abstractions. And he starts by documenting jQuery in JavaScript land, but then he moves to Ruby, waging a mighty battle against a tight coupling of Rails by forging the sword of Merb. Later, all parties agree to lay down their arms and join together in harmony, and there was peace in the land. And Yehuda founds a branch from the Church of the 80% use case called Our Lady of Shared Abstractions. But that didn't last forever. He ran into conflicts almost immediately. I think, is this the one where he dies by a goat? Let's see, is this the goat? Hey goat, what's up? Nope. Hi. Goats are assholes. After Rails 3, Yehuda is driven from the Rails community for his unwillingness to renounce JavaScript. But it's actually really interesting, he says as he speeds away. Keeping an eye out for what's next, he spied a project that offered a glimpse into the app-like future of the web, Sprout Core. His devotion to building a full-featured UI framework divided the Sprout Core team against themselves, and he left and renamed his project so that he could restore peace. Now, having seen the sun rise and fall in a multitude of environments, he knows his philosophy hasn't changed, but he learned some tactical approaches to spread the word about the Church of Shared Abstractions. So his philosophy stays the same, but he pivots on the technology and tools that align with his tactics at the time. From JavaScript to Ruby, back to JavaScript, Sprout Core to Ember, back to Ember, or JavaScript to Rust, and then back to Ember, Ember to Glimmer, working on the TC39 working group, whatever other secret crazy shit he's doing. His philosophy of using shared abstractions carried across all of those pivots. So instead of doing one thing for that entire time, because it was like a tactical fit at the moment, he was constantly moving his tactical fit around. A key tenet of the Church of Shared Abstractions is that a community thrives by building during an open experimentation phase and then accepting and supporting shared solutions as a new layer of abstractions to build on. He holds on to that mission, but not necessarily those tactics. And again, things seem to have worked out pretty well for him as he continues to push his message. Okay, the next one is going to be a little awkward because last time I gave this talk, this person was not in the room. Our third story is a little closer to home in that this one is directly and painfully my fault. I'm going to take you through a tour of one of our apps' history and some of its code. The hero of this story is Chris Freeman. He's the UI lead at Ojo Labs, and spoiler alert, I'm the villain. In the beginning, everything was super peachy. Chris joined us to help build a complex and robust consumer application. And our tactical goals were really clear. We had to build a single-page app, we had to do it really fast, stick close to community solutions, and then use tools and technologies that look good on a resume. That's not a joke, it was really important. Like, That's money in the bank, yo. Philosophically, Chris and I both believe that like community is really key and staying close to paved roads is important, that outside in testing brings the best long-term results. And then small teams can get leverage by building on shared abstractions. So Chris is like, cool. Why are you telling me we need to do this in React? And to me, it came down to the concept of like, well, we had React in our code base already, in a different code base. So we had people there that knew it. There's a much larger community around it. That's probably good, right? And I wasn't sure I would be able to hire people to come build Ember applications with us, because everybody wanted to put that cool label on their resume. So we start this adventure by choosing React. And that means you get to build your own framework. And I love this picture also because my first 40 hours in Zelda Breath of the Wild was just using it as a cooking simulator. If you have played it, it's pretty amazing. I made a lot of shitty food. All right, so let's build a framework so that we can build an app. So we start with build tooling, which used to be the biggest barrier to getting started with React, but has gotten a lot better. These days, it's not so bad. You take the tutorials, play around, use create React app. It's sort of inspired by Ember CLI, but not really, it doesn't try to duplicate its functionality. So first thing you got to know about create React app is it's cool with some tightly defined boundaries, but as soon as you want to step outside those boundaries, you have to eject, meaning that it does this one-time move operation that freezes your config as is, and any future configuration or upgrades is up to you to do manually through its dependency tree. So it's basically like it'll bootstrap you. So you don't want to eject, because it's handling a lot of stuff for you. So I don't want to do that. I want to stay inside this nice warm cabin. So some folks are trying to figure out, okay, how do we stay? I know this wasn't designed for us to stay in forever, but I want to stay in here as long as possible. For me, I was hoping to never need to eject and use whatever generators it comes with, and I was willing to make it work even if it gets a little claustrophobic in there. The problem is you actually can't. You can hack around it for a while, and there are people trying to like make SaaS work with it and do this and do that while you're still in create React app. But it's really primarily a bootstrapping tool. It's not meant to be your long-term place of residence, and there's not really a team or a track in place to make that a long-term viable option in React. So you might want to bail out on like, oh shoot, no. You might not want to stay in there. So that was my first like little warning sign of using React was like, why does the first party config tool literally become useless as soon as you take the wrapping paper off it? I had to do a little bit of a double take. It looked so awesome at first and got weird so fast. It was so we got our basic app config built and we ejected immediately before our cabin exploded. And with that, we had a simple hello world app in just a few minutes. And anybody who's ever built a React app knows the feeling of, now what? Because you want all these things. You know you're going to need links and routes and data. So you have to like figure out, well, what do we do now? Okay, well, routes seems like a meaningful place to start. So hold on, though. You know how you're building the app? The first thing you have to do is like spend a week researching routers. Every time you build a new app, it's the best. It's my favorite part of building web applications. In any other programming universe, that sounds like the most ludicrous concept in the world. But even that, I'm just kidding about because we do some research and we realize we have to pick our something else first. There's a little bit of a side mission here. Some of these routers will or won't work depending on which state management library that we choose. So that means in order to choose our router, we get an unskippable side quest to choose our state management library. And it's not like the fun side quest. This one's the one where you have to like follow somebody around for like 15 minutes, and if they see you, you have to start over again. And you're like, why did you put it in this game? And it's just to make the game longer. So in order to choose a router, you need to decide how you want to manage state in your app. So the second layer of our stack is going to be managing state, not routes, which is actually a form of state management itself, but we'll come back to that. And this is not a small decision. Redux becomes the thing that shapes your entire app. Your app is actually now a Redux app that has a React view layer. Before we were building a React app, now we're talking about maybe building a Redux app. And remember, don't use Redux when you're starting with React. The conventional wisdom in React land says don't use Redux until you feel enough pain from not using Redux that the only sensible decision at that point is to use Redux. But also when you're starting, don't not use Redux. Or you'll get stuck with some tricky bugs. In our case, we want to stay on paved roads and we can't even have a router until we pick one, so we're just going to use Redux, even though we should and should not. So here's a simplified rough map of what I think the popular options are for these. Cool. Look, everybody uses Redux, and everybody says it's great. And it is. It's kind of cool. It owns your app architecture from now on, but that's actually okay. And it is really neat. It's got all the cool factor and the ergonomics of a couch made of Legos. So here's my second weird red flag. Everyone says to delay choosing Redux, except we have to choose whether we're using Redux to choose a routing layer. And this seems a little backwards to me, but we'll come back to it a little bit later. All right, so now we can pick a router. I wanted to stick to the paved roads, so first we said, okay, well this is a little while ago, and React Router v4 was pretty new, and half my friends were saying, don't use React Router v4, use React Router v3, and we were trying to figure out how to make that, either one of those work nicely with Redux, and that's how it'll work. So we found one that we liked better while we were auditioning routers, which is a fun week or two, and we landed on Redux Little Router. I say we. At this point, Chris Freeman has basically taken over this entire app, because I'm like, fuck this. So, but now we can start routing. The way that you route in React is through declaring routes as components in the root of your app. And once you get used to that, it's actually pretty straightforward. And notice that we're rendering a versus container here, but we can come back to that. So sure enough, when we go to the URL, we can see the routed components rendering there. So with those routes in place, we can actually start passing in data to show on the page. And so we tried to follow the convention of container components, which is basically a way of building templates without building templates in React. So you don't want to use templates, but you want to basically build your components in a way that you're basically building templates. So that's what we're doing here. You don't have to worry about how it's working. That's just the concept. So one of the components is the template, and the other one is essentially a controller, but don't call it a controller because you'll get yelled at. And this not a controller just displays some hello text and renders another component. So Redux now needs to bootstrap itself and be ready to receive actions, which is just a simple switch statement here. Then we need to load all the reducers in one place so that the state changes take place in one big chunk. And if you don't know what reducers are, don't worry, because literally nobody does. So now we need to actually get the data from a server and, heaven willing, actually submit it back. That leads us to our next decision point. What do we do for accessing data from external sources? So there's dozens of options to choose from, but here's some top contenders. Fetch is a pretty cool, built-in primitive. We chose Axios, which is popular, and it's nice because it comes with a utility called Moxios that lets you mock out requests, and we were looking to figure out how to test this stuff. So at this point, though, we have thoroughly crossed the threshold where we have any paved roads or community guidance. So we're deep in the realm of you come across a blog post and it's like a glass of water in the desert. You're like, oh my God, a blog post about something that's similar to what I'm doing. And you come back to the same documentation over and over again, each time hoping that somehow it's different than the last time you crossed it. So we set up our first Redux action, which is the only way to tell Redux that you want to push changes into that big central store. This is a simple example in Redux where we need to define a function called getDataFromServer that loads data from the server and dispatches the result into the Redux store via this loadData action. If it looks obtuse and ergonomically unfriendly, that's correct. Congratulations for noticing that. Once you've done the ugly bits, though, we can pass getDataFromServer as a property in our top level app component. For now, just clicking a button in the top level should load some data, and it does. All right, it's going so good. We've come so far. Loading data when a user presses a button is fine for a demo, but that's not probably the app that you were asked to build by your boss. We need to load data when a user navigates to a route, submit that data, automatically transition routes on success or fail. This is not simple application logic, especially when you need to do it again and again throughout your app. So we need to have some way to react to these state changes in the app that come from side effects, which in Redux land requires a little bit of finesse. So this was tricky. We wanted the simplest solution we could use without backing ourselves into a corner. A lot of teams actually get stuck here, and we were not an exception. So Freeman decided to try the simplest thing that could work, Redux Thunk. It seemed like the most straightforward way to do basic async things with Redux, just like for like 1 hot minute. Bye. So I'm starting to see a pattern in the documentation for React tools. If you have to ask, you probably don't need this, and then you'll just know, you know? Like the tools have to call you from some spiritual place before you're allowed to use them. Like my question is like, why do all the tools in React land start with, when you discover the secret, the purpose of this library will reveal itself to you. So the problem with Redux Thunk is that it was becoming clear it was going to turn into a rat's nest of callbacks. So Freeman decided, okay, let's try Redux Saga. It's got a little more structure for async work, and it sounds way more epic. So this does seem to let us handle the side effects from every change in the route in this transition saga. So we fired this router location change, I believe it's called, somewhere here. On the bottom, there it is. See, it's easy to find. From watch router, which if the name matches our artisanally crafted if statement, we can asynchronously load data from the server, hold for the response, and then fire another action that should, in theory, eventually let us fire off a transition to a success route. Easy peasy, mate. So even at this stage, we're creating one of hundreds of possible configurations, and we are now quite possibly the only ones that have this framework in the world. And maybe there's good news to that. Like we're designing the framework that fits our exact needs for our use case. So why are we like feeling kind of crappy about it? After all, we have most of the things that we need cobbled together to actually create a route, load it to data. It's probably going to have some bugs to fix and edge cases to solve. And the skeleton, though, of an application is really in there. The problem is our confidence in this hand-rolled solution isn't. And it's starting to get harder to make changes reliably already. So Chris, if you know him or don't, he's an experienced dev, and he knows that our goal is to deliver business value. And he knows that a lot of the stuff that we're doing runs counter to this tactical goal, and he keeps pressing on me. And for instance, in this case, we had to bail on outside-in testing, at least for now, because this test setup for this was too difficult. So Chris is like asking why we're pursuing this track when we basically succeeded in building a fraction of a crappier Ember. And I'm sure that I had very good reasons, but my primary response was shut your pie hole. So we're pretty deep into our own framework by now. I mean, there is such a thing as sunk cost. Sometimes it's a fallacy, and sometimes you really don't have time to go unsync that cost. A lot of presidents running for re-election will try to tell you probably shouldn't change horses midstream. Now is not a time to rethink your decision. Just stick with what you know, even if it's the worst thing in the world. So up to this point, we've been waffling on the model layer about whether we should use plain JavaScript objects or find a model layer from some library or use something like immutable. Each of those has pluses and minuses, and I gotta be honest, I don't really care anymore. I'm dead inside, so just use whatever you want. So we choose immutable.js. Although I'm personally, I've had pretty good luck just using plain vanilla JavaScript objects. We use immutable.js records, which are kind of nice, to create these immutable models, which we can pass into our Redux store, then down into the UI. And so at this point, this is pretty much a framework. It was painful, but we did it. I can't help but think we're missing something. Oh yeah, after all this effort that we poured into it, we realized we cannot move forward confidently without tests. All right, which one is this one? Oh yeah, the duck's kicking you off the cliff. Okay, so finally we're gonna start thinking about testing. We've been putting it off, but it's time to pay down some of this debt. Okay, most of our technical risks live in the junction points between these, but it's probably fine. Because unit testing, it can only get you so far if all you're able to test is the stuff inside one of these little circles. So we want to push for outside in and start driving with acceptance tests. So we're gonna, back in, what was it, March, April of last year, we're gonna just pluck one of those nice off the shelf React acceptance testing solutions. Off the, right, it's somewhere around here, I saw it. Okay, so that didn't pan out. We'll have to roll our own. But setting up JavaScript testing is its own rat's nest of fragmented dependencies, which I will not diagram here. Choosing a test runner, a browser environment, virtual or real, test framework, assertion framework, mocking library, Ajax stubbing library, all to drive an application that is already one of many thousands of possible framework combinations. And I don't know if you've noticed yet, we haven't talked about building UI yet. And this is just to get data loading into any of the routes at all. And even that was surprisingly DIY, where there's a lot of competition, but not a ton of cooperation, and you have a lot, like the sort of graveyard of half-abandoned UI component projects. So it really did take us about this long to realize how hard we were trying to swim upstream in the React community. The React community is really great. They have a good meetup, they're good people, but their priorities weren't stuff that we felt like we could fight, like the prioritization of unit testing over acceptance testing, not least of which because unit testing in React is really easy, and acceptance testing was very hard. So at that point, we're like, well, we're just gonna keep swimming, we're close, so let's just keep swimming upstream. And so we went crawling back to Karma after making fun of it publicly in multiple talks after Ember CLI made testing brainlessly easy. But then after literally weeks of failed attempts using Jest, Nightmare, JSDOM, Enzyme, and other tools, we had to go crawling back to it. So we're back into the land. Charles and I remember from 5 years ago of copy and pasting, 4 or 5 years ago of copy pasting Karma comp files, tweaking them to hopefully something worked, or at least breaks in a more interesting way. So we had, after a while, a minimum viable test framework that mostly worked most of the time, but had its own bugs, which we're not gonna write a test framework for that. So congratulations, we did it. We built a unique snowflake of fragile, interlocked dependencies, a Jenga tower, if you will. And after charting into the deepest unknown regions of space, we plotted our course through this mess and made our own framework. There it is in all its glory. So, there was fun stuff about it. We learned a lot of new stuff, but there are real monetary time and sanity costs that come along with building your own hand-rolled framework. The first is like, why was our router a mishmash of actual routing logic and nested if statements? Why is it so hard to have things happen on route transitions, like making API requests, but then redirects on success and failure, or showing a loading state, or other what should be reasonably common use cases? And then second, we had a lot of problems trying to standardize data loading in this model layer so that we could look up related data or make server calls without a ton of ceremony. And then lastly, our acceptance test framework was like not suitable to actually qualify as an acceptance test framework, but we didn't sign up to create a testing framework. I know somebody who would, but you would. So the third option in these things is you can retreat. It's not glorious, there's no glory in retreat, but it's also sometimes really smart to realign yourself with a better tactical or philosophical fit. It doesn't sound super heroic, but it can be the least bad option in some really bad situations. So Freeman comes back again, this time with a little more vigor, I guess, saying, this is our last chance to rewrite the app before we can no longer deliver features anywhere near the pace that we're being asked to. And I was super proud because he actually built a halfway decent framework in React. But this is where he was feeling this pain, right? In the React ecosystem, there doesn't seem to be a way around hyperlocal optimization every time you need to implement a feature. Cohesion or collaboration between tools is hard to come by. And this winds up being especially and exquisitely painful for very small teams or solo developers. And we were like 1,000 commits and 6 months into this project, pressing reset and doing a full front-end rewrite. That just anybody that's ever worked in software for a long time knows this is a terrible idea. So to take stock of the reality of the situation, I had to go back and revisit our goals at the outset of this thing. They were to move fast, to stay close to paved roads, to pad people's resume, and then do things that were sort of novel. So we sacrificed our top level, most important business goals for the shinier, lower level goals that mattered a lot less. Like, our CEO didn't give a shit if my resume is padded. He needs software. Not only that, we actually also sacrificed most of our philosophical goals. Like, we didn't get to do a lot of this stuff. We didn't have time to push an entire community forward. If you find yourself out of philosophical fit, it means that you're in for a fight. And we had no time left over to get back in there with the community and try to push things forward. So this is the part where I finally cave. I decided to stop being wrong after I realized what I'd sacrificed to stay on this path. And midstream or not, it was time to change horses. So the goal now, if you're going to do something like this, is to try to de-risk this. So we decided to give it 72 hours to try to make it work. And in 72 hours, it's actually pretty successful. Freeman sliced off a quarter of the app and got it done in like those 3 days. So, all right, cool. We'll carve out a time box, 2 weeks. We'll check in after a week and see how things go. I wanted to show more code around the rewrite, but it's not very interesting. It actually wasn't. What is interesting is suddenly we were able to drive out our new framework's implementation with tests for basically free, with acceptance tests, something we've just been dying to do. The other thing we learned is when we had written our React components well, they translated very smoothly. Like when we had done our components and they were container or whatever, great, that's a controller, that's the handlebars template, and we can peel some of these things, our components. It was really easy to bucket them unless our components were crap. And then it was very difficult. So it was actually a great litmus test and a requirement that we refactor our crappy React components into better Ember ones. So we actually got some valuable refactoring out of this process. And kind of astonishingly, we actually completed the upgrade inside those 2 weeks with our shiny new tests. A lot contributed to that, but we did a gut check every 48 hours to make sure that we weren't kidding ourselves. We managed it like a project with a tight timeline and cut scope where we could. Like we didn't do everything that we really wanted to, but it turns out we shipped it to production in 2 weeks. After fighting for every inch of ground for 6 or 8 months, the process of going into Ember felt like we were just cruising downhill. Again, let's look at the graph that shows why we weren't able to bear this weight of supporting our own framework and launch a product under a tight timeline. This isn't an indictment. I know it may come across as such. It's not an indictment of React. This is great if you have a team that is large enough to support plotting your course through this, but the React community is not going to document you through this. You will not get there alone. So for really small teams, plotting your course through this is super not great. Compare that graph to Ember. So when a community establishes a set of shared abstractions, you have a bunch of people at each of these nodes. So even when things diverge, they always tend to merge back to trunk. So by periodically closing that experimentation phase and moving into a shared solutions phase, you wind up with a wildly different result. You allow people to stop doing this hyper local optimization and step back to collectively optimize the entire stack. So there's this stable platform to build on. This graph can also help explain why the React community is like 20 times bigger than the Ember community, but the Ember community has a sense of cohesion and a set of tools that a lot of times are better than what you're going to find of any equivalent local maximum in React. So it worked out for us, but the rewrite came months later than it should have happened. So it's worth doing a little postmortem and figuring out how we got into that place. So, well, if you have a manager, your manager is supposed to listen to you. And I knew we were experiencing pain, but I prioritized our lowest importance tactical goals over our highest importance ones because I didn't think they were flexible. I never really stepped back to evaluate our true tactical and philosophical goals. So it took me too long to realize the actual cost of what we were trying to do, and I realized at that point we couldn't bear those costs anymore. Once you realize that you're swimming upstream somehow, you have a few choices. So you can keep up the fight, you can change your tactics, or you can change your environment entirely. So the heroes that we think of are typically the people who persevere in the face of enormous difficulty, but that's not always the best thing. So when do you know? How do you know when to stand up and fight? So I think when you're swimming upstream philosophically, but you have a strong tactical reason to persist. So like, you know that you're kind of fighting the philosophy of a group of people, but you're making that money. Like, that makes sense not to give up. Think of DHH and Rails. He had this 80% use case philosophy, convention over configuration, all this stuff that the programming open source community at the time was not really super receptive of, but a small group maybe were. And the reason he was able to persist is he figured out how to make it align with his tactical goals. But you have to be prepared. If you are going to do this, you are in for a slog. It can take 5 years or a decade to make the transition that you want to have if you're trying to make impact at a community level. And sometimes the smart move is just to pivot, to change your approach without changing your environment. So when you're in an environment that supports your philosophy, but you don't see your tactics bearing fruit, you can pivot and try new tactics without changing anything too radical. So I think Sandy Metz, if you know her writing or know of her, she's a great example. She did a few decades in Smalltalk, then Java, then Ruby, and trying new tactics and strategies while holding on to a philosophy that actually improves the way that we design software. Or Yehuda, who has a wide variety of ways that he finds different tactical fits for his core philosophy of shared abstractions and community. And sometimes, just throw your pig in the ocean, because the current is carrying you faster than you can possibly swim. When your environment has no hope of meeting your tactical goals, and it's an upstream philosophical battle, just get the heck out of there. This can also be a clue as to when you should do that big, scary rewrite, when you realize there's never going to be a downhill slope. And there may not be a way to iterate your way to philosophical or a tactical alignment. It may be time to back out and retreat to a place that offers you something. And if you're sitting on like high philosophical fit and high tactical fit, you are actually swimming downstream. So enjoy that ride, because it's not going to last forever. So you may not gathered from the context of this conversation, but I'm actually not interested in trashing React. I think it's great technology, and I think it's actually a great community. It's just that the ecosystem doesn't currently strongly reflect my own personal philosophies, and it didn't match my tactical goals in this situation. And so it wasn't worth us sticking through and trying to fight and have the change that we want in the React community, because we didn't have any tactical goals to carry us to the other side of that. I like React. I think Ember has already learned a lot from it. It could stand to learn a lot more. If I could design my dream framework, I like JSX. I like the React toolchain in a lot of ways, but I want somebody to take, in that community, a holistic approach to thinking about shared abstractions and an 80% use case for building single-page apps. React is a really competent view layer, and Redux is a really competent state management tool, but there are not people thinking about this holistically until you actually have to do it just for your own company. So there's a lot of really great closed source React frameworks out there. Routing, models, immutable state management, simple templating, most importantly, a focus on outside-in testing. I want a tool with a strong enough trunk to support a community that shares some values and solutions with each other, that cares about documentation and support, and treats testing and deployment as first-class citizens. But excuse me, princess, aren't you just basically describing Ember? And I just want to shake people that are building single-page applications and be like, oh my God, just use Ember. Please. It's so good. If you're at a small startup with one or two front-end people, and it's not realistic to swim upstream of an entire community and try to teach the shared abstractions philosophy or acceptance testing to the React community, then don't. Just use the thing that saves your boss $250,000 and be a hero. So people are trying new technologies all the time. Communities are finding good tactical alignment for people. Sarah May noticed that people were stepping out from the Ruby community and trying other things. And taking the philosophy that they honed in Ruby and bringing them to Rust and Go, JavaScript, Elixir, lots more. They're joining this now much more more diverse in terms of programming languages, community of programming, and as they step out from Ruby, which is this really strong, cohesive community, they're starting to step out into this broader community and realizing, oh, this is a really big world and there are a lot of ideas in it. And that can both be scary and it can actually be really empowering. So in that vein, the React story actually has a happy ending. My friend, who's named Charles Lowell, and I did not know was going to be here tonight, and this is like 3 Christmases and a birthday. He's Cowboy D on the internets, and he had more tactical reasons to stick with this fight. And he's evangelizing the idea of outside-in testing. And Frontside is developing a fully realized acceptance testing solution to React right now. They're ready to fight to share the philosophy with the rest of the broader JavaScript and React community. And we need more people like that in JavaScript land. So I encourage you to reach out to Charles, to get in touch to help, to get there to push this and other communities forward. There are a lot of opportunities out there to make a meaningful difference. The reason this matters so much to me is I view Ember as this like beautiful flickering light in the community, and I don't want to see that light extinguished because I love the ideas in Ember, and I think they're meaningful, and I think they're worth sharing. I don't think it's even had its biggest impact yet. I built some apps with it, and that's great, but I don't think it's even had 1/10 the impact that it's going to have. For me, in this case, returning to Ember was just a math problem that made sense. But for many of you, your math is going to wind up being different. You won't be doing Ember professionally in 5 years, fewer still in 10. And if you do find yourself doing something different to solve a problem, go to their meetup. Find yourself in a new community. See what you can contribute. It'll be at that moment that you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not a lone hero in the wilderness. Ember is not a lone hero in the wilderness. We're part of a broader community of people trying to solve problems in the best way that we know how. And I'm certain that Ember's biggest benefit and its lasting impact is its community of people and the philosophy of building a platform of shared solutions. Ember was completely fearless in blazing its own trail and fighting for its philosophy. And for better or worse, it kind of set itself apart from the broader JavaScript community. The bad news is, one of those leftover effects is this kind of echo chambery feel you get sometimes within the Ember ecosystem that can be hard to see past. But the JavaScript tent is way bigger than it was when I got started with Ember 5 years ago. And it's time for Ember people to start getting involved and grab a shovel in the JavaScript community to bring our philosophy and our solutions to the larger community and ecosystem. So if I can get a little personal for a minute, I told Charles this. I sat last night thinking about what happened 5 years ago, almost 5 years and 4 days ago, when Nola and Charles and me had a discussion on Twitter, and we decided that we wanted to meet up and shoot the shit about Ember stuff. And I sat at my desk and just cried, thinking about how grateful I am when I read this Twitter exchange. When I started playing with Ember, it completely reshaped the way that I thought to design web applications. It completely broke my mind about the possibilities of the web. More than that, it grew into a community of people that have reshaped my entire life. I run a business, then quit, started a podcast, then quit, started a meetup, then quit. And I watched people enter and exit my company and my community. But most importantly, I've made friendships that are going to last me the rest of my life. I'll never be able to repay Charles or my friend Stanley or the community of people that have changed my life for the better over the last 5 years. I asked my wife, like, how different is my life? Because Charles and me and Nola had a conversation on Twitter 5 years ago. It's radically different, radically better. I just know now that I'm driven to grow and share the benefits of some of the stuff of this gift with whoever I'm able. So my hope for you is that you'll experience these gifts as well. And if you have, to hold on to those gifts that you've been given and be able to keep that spark of gratitude alive and let it light a fire in you like that and find a way to share it with other people. Thank you. I love you for being here. I'm to Viking on Twitter. Thanks to Ojo Labs to let me come here with y'all.
We've got a little time. Questions?
Did you have a name for your framework?
You don't name something that you plan to kill. Yeah, you know how you name a pig Bacon? We should just call it Bacon. Oh, there was already a Bacon.js. Stop screen recording. All right. Yeah, any other questions for Freeman, who actually did any of the work involved in this?
When you said that you thought that Ember had only done about 1/10 of what it was going to do, you obviously haven't read the think piece on JavaScript frameworks and how Ember is historically significant.
It's historically significant. I don't think the Ember community is going to grow by 10 times the number of people, but I think its impact is going to grow tremendously. I think literally, like, there's a handful of people in this room that are going to be largely responsible for that. That the biggest impact that it's going to have is through reshaping the way people think and to be clear, demanding more from our ecosystem instead of giving it a free pass because React is neat and looks good on a resume. Yeah, it's going to make you some money, but you have a sort of moral obligation to demand more of the ecosystem in which you work. If you have the capability of contributing that stuff, opening issues or gluing things together, writing blog posts, I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else. Like, starting to evangelize this idea of building a dream framework And maybe it's not React. Maybe it's waiting. But I don't think you're going to make React not ubiquitous like jQuery, because it does one job really well, and so it got promoted past its level of competence. And so it's now the boss of frameworks, even though it wasn't a framework at all. It was just a really nice view layer, and now it's like, it's the developer that wrote some really good code and is now a shitty manager. But I think you can coach. I think you can coach it, and so I'm going to keep using Ember to solve real problems, and I think the Ember community is great. But I also think that as like getting out of the bubble and sharing ideas is going to be the next major contribution that Ember makes, and not we don't need any more of Tom's thought leadership. We just need people grabbing shovels. I love Tom, but we don't need that. We don't need his. We're good. And I'm glad he's retired or whatever he does. I hope he's super happy. He's a really cool dude. All right. Anything else?
Do you have any plans to use React any further?
Yeah, I don't think I'll escape it. But I won't, like our platform at our office, as far as we build applications, it's not worth it. If I was working on a larger team that was looking to optimize for different things, if you're looking to optimize for load time speed or being able to drop it into an existing application easily, lots of other things. You know, there are lots of situations where Ember doesn't make hardly any sense at all, but it's going to be my go-to because my job is to make money for people. And when that's not true anymore, I could see React being a really great tool. When my job is to make money for a big giant corporation that is willing to support the weight of an entire framework. But yeah, startup land, please don't. You're going to spend so much money. It's not your money. If it's VC money, it's probably fine.
So good to become a job.
Yeah.
Can you come talk to my boss?
Yeah, why are people's boss telling them what framework to use? Sorry, Freeman. Sorry. I realized that after I said it. Well, crap. This has been thank you for giving me the opportunity to indict myself for 40 minutes. Awesome. Okay, thanks everybody.